r/pettyrevenge. Grandma sold my stuff after parents left, so I exposed her scam. Hashtag chunk 1. I didn't notice anything was wrong until Thursday afternoon. That's what gets me about the whole thing. I was so used to Grandma being around that I didn't even think to check. She'd been staying with us for 2 weeks while Mom and Dad were in Portugal, and honestly, I'd barely seen her. She kept to herself mostly, made some casseroles, did her thing in the guest room. I did mine. We existed in the same house like ghosts passing through walls. But Thursday, I went looking for my PS5. It wasn't in the entertainment center where it always sat. Grandma. I called down the stairs, my stomach already doing that weird flip thing. Did you unplug my PS5? Like, was it in the way or something? She was in the kitchen, sitting at the island with her laptop and a cup of coffee. She didn't even look up. Oh, honey, she said, in that saccharine voice she uses when she's about to say something condescending. I donated it. You're 17, you spend way too much time on those games anyway. It's not healthy. Your mother would agree with me. My mother would not agree with her, but that wasn't even the point. You, what? I felt my face getting hot. That's not yours to donate. I'm doing you a favor, she said, finally glancing up with this infuriating smile. Besides, you don't need all this junk cluttering up your room. That's when I really started looking. My shelf of vintage gaming collectibles, * gone star. The limited edition Zelda figures I've been collecting since I was 12, the rare Pokemon cards in their protective cases, the signed poster from the gaming convention Dad took me to before he retired from his old job, all of it just vanished. My stomach dropped further with each missing item. Where is my stuff? My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. Grandma, where did you put everything? She stood up from the island with this casual slowness that made my blood boil. I sold some of the more valuable items, they're collecting dust, and you clearly don't appreciate them. The rest I donated to Goodwill. You should be thanking me. Your room looks so much nicer now. The room looked emptier. The room looked like a stranger lived in it. You sold them. I couldn't process this. Without asking me. Those were mine. Those were gifts. And now they belong to people who might actually use them, she said, turning back to her coffee like we just finished a pleasant conversation about the weather. Besides, I reinvested the money. It's all good. I went upstairs and really, truly searched my room. Drawers, closet, under the bed, nothing. She'd cleaned me out. Not just the gaming stuff either. My vintage board game collection, a wooden music box that had belonged to my great-grandmother, who'd passed 5 years ago, several graphic novels I'd been collecting, and worst of all, the box of letters and photos from my grandfather. My grandfather died when I was 14. That box was the most precious thing I owned. He'd written letters to me that were supposed to be opened when I grew up. Some of them were in there. Old photographs of him. A watch of his that Dad had given me on my 16th birthday. And she'd. No, I whispered to myself, checking under my bed again like they might have magically reappeared. No, no, no. I took the stairs 2 at a time. The letters from Grandpa, I said. My voice was shaking. The box in my closet. Where is it? She didn't even flinch. That was junk, honey. Old papers. It wasn't junk to me. I yelled. I don't usually yell at adults. I'm generally a pretty calm person. But something in me just snapped. Did you sell Grandpa's letters? Did you sell those? The expression on her face, this flash of something defensive and annoyed, told me everything. Some items were antiques, she said coolly. That watch was a nice piece. The letters were just paper. I left the kitchen. I couldn't be in the same room with her without doing something I'd regret. Instead, I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed in this weird state of shock and fury that made my hands shake and my ears ring. The first thing I did was pull out my phone and open eBay. I searched her username, which I knew because she bragged about her online shopping to me once. And there it was. Her seller profile. Grandma deals, or some variation of that. Active for the past 2 weeks. An absolutely staggering number of recent sales, all of them from items I recognized. I screenshotted everything. The PS5. The collectible figures with descriptions that made my stomach turn, she'd listed them as gently used vintage gaming memorabilia, perfect for collectors. The graphic novels. And there, in the sold listings, a series of photographs labeled vintage pocket watch and antique letters, estate sale lot. $340 for my grandfather's watch and letters. She'd sold my grief for $340. My hands were literally shaking as I screenshotted each listing, each sold item, each price. I opened a blank notes file on my phone and started documenting everything I could remember, dates, what she'd taken, when I'd last seen each item, what it meant to me. Some of these things were irreplaceable. Not because they were expensive, but because they were mine. Because they connected me to people I loved, to parts of my life that mattered. My parents were going to lose their minds when they found out. But something else was nagging at me too, something she'd said. I reinvested the money. What did that mean? And the way she'd said it, so casual, like this was all just part of some bigger plan. I had a week and a half before my parents came home. And in that time, I had to figure out exactly how deep this went. Because I had a feeling that my missing gaming equipment was just the beginning. Hashtag chunk 2. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there in the dark, staring at my phone, refreshing her eBay seller page over and over like it might suddenly tell me something different. Like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But no, there it all was. Documentation of her theft, basically gift wrapped for anyone who wanted to look. By 2 a.m., I had a spreadsheet going. I know that sounds insane, but I needed to process this somehow. I needed to turn this rage into something productive, something concrete. I listed every item I could remember with approximate dates, last known location in my room, and estimated value. Some things I could verify because I'd taken photos before. The Zelda figures had been in an Instagram post I'd made 6 months ago. The graphic novels were in a photo my friend had sent me for my birthday. The watch had been in a family photo from Christmas. By 3 a.m., I had documented 47 items. By 4 a.m., I'd found 12 more of them actively listed on her eBay page, not yet sold. I screenshotted every single one. The thing that really started eating at me, though, was something she'd said in the kitchen. Asterisk, I reinvested the money. Asterisk, that phrasing stuck with me like a splinter. Who uses language like that about selling their grandchild's belongings? It sounded like business language. Like she was running some kind of operation. So I did something I'm not particularly proud of, I snooped. Around 5 a.m., when I was certain she was asleep, the guest room was silent, and her light had been off for hours, I crept downstairs. The kitchen was dark except for the glow of the stove clock. Her laptop was still on the island where she'd left it, sitting closed and innocent looking. My hands hovered over it for a solid 30 seconds. This was crossing a line. I knew that. But she'd crossed about 50 lines, so I figured I was due. I opened it. The laptop wasn't even password protected, that's how little she thought anyone would care to look. Her email was open. Her eBay account was logged in. And when I checked her browser history, I found something that made my stomach drop all over again. She wasn't just selling my stuff. There were searches for how to flip estate sales, best items to resell for profit, quick money from collectibles, and, most damning, multiple searches for items at estate sales that resell well. And then, buried in her browsing history, I found something worse, a Facebook group called Estate Sale Flippers, Buy Low, Sell High, where she was an active member, posting photos of items and asking other members for pricing advice. She'd posted a photo of my grandfather's watch. My grandfather's watch. In a group chat with strangers, asking, what's the market value for this vintage Bulova? Found it at an estate. Found it. Like she hadn't stolen it from her own grandchild. I felt sick. Actually, physically ill. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to breathe through the surge of betrayal and anger. That's when I heard the floorboards creak upstairs. I snapped the laptop shut and practically sprinted back to my room, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might actually explode. I lay in bed, listening, but after a few minutes of silence, I heard snoring resume from the guest room. She just shifted in her sleep. But I'd gotten what I needed. I spent the rest of the early morning going through her eBay and PayPal histories, yes, still snooping, yes, still feeling guilty about it, but also, she'd sold my grandfather's letters, so guilt seemed like a secondary concern. What I found was systematic. Methodical, even. She'd been doing this for months, not just at our house, but it looked like she'd been doing it at other people's houses too. There was a note in her email, forwarded from someone named Patricia, thanking her for organizing and liquidating her mother's belongings while she was going through a move. Patricia had even sent her payment, which meant Grandma had charged this woman for the privilege of selling her dead mother's things. And then there were the ones at our house, which seemed to be about more than just quick cash. There were entire folders in her email labeled with dates, April estate, June clear out, and then, most recent, Portugal trip opportunity. She'd planned this. She'd come to our house knowing my parents would be gone for 2 weeks, and she'd come prepared to turn our home into her personal inventory. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a moment of poor judgment. This was premeditated. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This was worse than just being robbed. This was being targeted. Being used. By 6:30 a.m., I'd compiled everything I'd found, the eBay listings, the PayPal transactions, the Facebook group posts, the email evidence, into a secure folder on my cloud drive with backups. I wasn't going to confront her without ammunition. And I wasn't going to wait for my parents to come home and deal with this passively. I had 9 days until they returned. 9 days to figure out my next move. At breakfast, I acted normal. Ate cereal. Said good morning. Listened to her talk about her plans to go to the grocery store, all while watching her sit there like she hadn't just dismantled my sense of trust in the people who were supposed to love me. She caught me staring at her once and smiled, actually smiled at me, like we were on good terms. Like we were a normal grandmother and grandchild having a normal week together. That's when I decided. This wasn't going to be about waiting for my parents. This wasn't going to be about letting her play happy family for another 9 days while she figured out how to spin her story to them. This wasn't going to end with just my family knowing what she'd done. If she thought she could profit off my loss, off my grief, off my things, then she needed to understand that actions had consequences. And I was going to make sure she understood that very, very clearly. I had an idea forming, and it was going to require documentation, strategy, and patience. But I had all three. And unlike my grandmother, I had something else too, I had right on my side. She just didn't know it yet. #chunk3. The hardest part about deciding to expose someone is that you have to keep living with them while you plan it. For the next 3 days, I moved through our house like an actor in a play I'd already memorized. Wake up, shower, eat breakfast, make small talk, pretend my world hadn't fundamentally shifted. The irony wasn't lost on me, my grandmother had taught me, apparently, how to be a convincing liar. I spent those days documenting everything more carefully. I made a second spreadsheet that actually traced her movements. When did she sell what? Which items disappeared first? Were there patterns? I cross-referenced her eBay seller activity with the times I knew she was home alone, the times my parents had mentioned she'd been resting in the guest room. Every single transaction lined up with an opportunity she created for herself. The Facebook group was a goldmine of depravity. I screenshotted her posts, at least 30 of them over the past 4 months. She was bragging in there. Sharing photos of items she'd acquired, asking for advice on pricing, celebrating sales. One post from 2 months ago showed her with my Zelda collectible figures, and the caption read, "Score from a family visit." These vintage Nintendo collectibles are flying off the shelves right now. Already tripled my investment. Tripled. Her investment. On my things. The comments on her posts were encouraging too, other flippers congratulating her, giving her tips on how to maximize profit margins, recommending which platforms were best for specific types of merchandise. It was like watching a masterclass in exploitation, and she was an eager student. But then, on day 4, something happened that changed everything. I was in my room when I heard her on the phone downstairs. The guest room door had been open when I passed, and her voice carried up through the heating vent, one of those annoying architectural features that made privacy in this house basically a joke. Yes, I'm still interested in the estate liquidation, she was saying. How soon would you need me? My entire body went still. Oh, that soon. That's perfect, actually. I have some time before I need to head back to my apartment. Apartment? She lived 2 hours away. She was only supposed to be here for the 2 weeks while my parents were gone. That's the whole arrangement. What's the timeline for the collection you mentioned? The books and memorabilia? I grabbed my phone and started recording audio through the vent. I knew it was illegal in some places, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. She'd lost the right to my consideration. And the family doesn't know you're handling the sale? Perfect. No, I understand, discretion is important. I can have a truck there by Friday. Friday. That was in 2 days. I pressed my ear closer to the vent, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear. Yes, I have a buyer who collects that era of science fiction. He'll pay top dollar. We can probably move everything within a week. Right, 50-50 split. I think that's fair. No, they won't ask questions. Trust me, these situations are always smoother when the family doesn't know what's happening. The call ended. I stood there in my room, shaking. Not with anger this time, with shock. She wasn't just stealing from us. She was running an actual scam. A legitimate, organized scam where she convinced families to let her handle their estate sales, and then she was undercutting them, not giving them their share, working with private buyers to keep prices low so she could pocket more profit. These situations are always smoother when the family doesn't know what's happening. That line was going to haunt her. My mind started spiraling into implications. How many families? How long had this been going on? Was this the reason she'd suddenly decided to help out with house sitting? Had she targeted my parents' trip specifically because she knew we'd be vulnerable, knew she'd have the house to herself, knew she could position herself as trustworthy before striking? I needed more information, but I also needed to be smarter about this. Audio recordings might not be admissible. I needed documentation. Real, solid, undeniable evidence. That night, I waited until I heard her snoring from the guest room, then I went back downstairs. My laptop was risky, she might notice if I didn't close it right, but I needed to see her email again. I needed to find this contact she'd been talking to. I needed to understand the full scope of what she was doing. The email was still logged in. Lazy security worked in my favor. I found it easily, a conversation thread from an address called sdetectivebuyer@gmail.com. The person identified themselves as Marcus, and they were offering my grandmother a commission on quick estate liquidations. They even had a template. A template for the process. They'd send her information about an estate, she'd coordinate with the family as if she were legitimately helping, she'd acquire the items at whatever lowball price she could negotiate, and then she'd sell them to Marcus or his network of buyers at a significant markup. They were splitting profits. This wasn't hobby flipping. This was organized fraud. I screenshot everything. Every email. Every transaction. Every message where she discussed deceiving families. And then I did something that made my hands shake. I screenshotted the current auction listings on her eBay account. The ones she hadn't sold yet. Because I needed to know exactly what was still out there that I could recover. There was a lot. I had a decision to make, and I had to make it fast. My parents were coming home in 6 days. My grandmother had already been in contact with someone about handling an estate sale, presumably my family's supposed liquidation of our own home, which meant she was planning something bigger. What if she was going to convince my parents to let her help organize our house? What if she'd already been planning a fuller theft operation? No. I couldn't let her get that far. I opened my notes app and started drafting an email to the eBay fraud investigation department. Then I pulled up the websites for PayPal's fraud team and the FTC. Then I opened a document where I listed every piece of evidence I had and organized it by category: items stolen from our home, items she'd fraudulently acquired from other families, the organized scam infrastructure, her communications with co-conspirators. I had the ammunition. But using it meant burning every bridge with my grandmother, potentially hurting her, really hurting her, legally. It meant involving authorities. It meant turning a family matter into something that couldn't be undone or smoothed over at some future holiday dinner. It also meant she couldn't hurt anyone else. I looked at the time, 3:47 a.m. I had 6 days. And I had to decide how far I was willing to go to make sure she understood that betrayal had a price. #Chunk4. I didn't file the reports that night. Instead, I sat at my laptop until sunrise, staring at the draft emails I'd composed, each one meticulously worded, each one a point of no return, and realized I needed to think like a prosecutor, not a vengeful teenager. The problem was that I had evidence of what she'd done to us. But to make anything stick legally, I needed to prove intent, pattern, and conspiracy. And more importantly, I needed to protect my parents from being caught in the fallout. Here's what I mean: if I reported the interstate fraud scheme too early, my grandmother would immediately realize it was me. She'd spiral. She might convince my parents that I was a troubled kid making things up, especially since I had no proof of her original thefts from our house, just a spreadsheet of missing items and her eBay seller activity, which could theoretically be coincidental. She'd have leverage because she could paint herself as the victim of a vindictive teenager. Worse, if she panicked, she might destroy evidence. She might contact Marcus and disappear the email trail. She might liquidate her accounts. She might even get ahead of the story by telling my parents I'd been acting strange and that she was concerned about my mental health. I'd seen her manipulate family dynamics before. I knew how good she was at it. So I did something that felt insane. I decided to wait. Not passively. Actively. Over the next 2 days, I became the perfect granddaughter. I made her breakfast. I asked about her life. I thanked her for helping out. I even sat and watched TV with her, making conversation about nothing important while my skin crawled with the effort of it. I needed her to believe everything was normal. I needed her to keep operating like nothing had changed. Because if she kept operating, she'd create more evidence. On day 5, she got another call. This time I was ready. I'd installed a voice recorder app on an old phone and positioned it near the vent in my room with the microphone pointed toward the opening. It was risky. If she found it, I'd have no explanation, but I needed documentation that would hold up better than just screenshots. The call was with Marcus. The timeline for the estate in Portland is moving faster than expected, Marcus was saying, his voice tinny through the speakerphone she apparently had him on. The widow wants everything gone by end of month. I'm thinking we could probably move it in 2 weeks if you're available. I might be tied up with a local situation, my grandmother said. Her voice had taken on that sweet, helpful tone she used with authority figures. But I should know more by early next week. I'm currently staying with family, so my availability is flexible. Flexible. Right. She'd been planning to steal from us, and then move on to the next mark. Perfect. And you're comfortable with the percentage split we discussed? 60-40 on this one. 60-40 works, she agreed. As long as we're clear that I handle the acquisition and you handle the buyers. They talked for another 10 minutes about logistics, truck rental, storage, insurance workarounds. She was professional about it in a way that made my stomach turn. This wasn't desperation or a moment of weakness. This was a practiced operation. When the call ended, I sat in the dark of my room and made a list of what I now knew. 1. She had an ongoing scheme with at least one co-conspirator. 2. She was targeting vulnerable families and seniors. 3. She was undercutting legitimate estate sales. 4. She was earning significant income from the fraud. 5. She had targeted my family specifically. 6. She was planning to continue the scheme even after my parents returned. And I had audio evidence of at least one conversation. Maybe more if I kept the recorder running. The question was whether I should escalate. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went through the guest room while she was downstairs watching her shows. I found a ledger, an actual physical ledger, tucked into her suitcase, with names, dates, and dollar amounts. Families she'd worked with. What she'd extracted. What she paid them. The margins were obscene. One entry read, Henderson Estate, quoted $8,000, paid $3,500, sold for $22,000. She'd stolen nearly $19,000 from one family. I photographed every single page with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to take some shots twice to make sure they were legible. That's when I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I froze, ledger in hand, in the middle of her room. If she caught me here, everything would collapse. She'd know I knew. She'd accelerate whatever timeline she had planned. The footsteps passed. She went to the bathroom. I shoved the ledger back into her suitcase, backed out of the room, and made it to my bedroom with maybe 2 seconds to spare before she came back downstairs. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. That's when I realized something crucial. I was becoming like her. Not in the stealing or the fraud, nothing like that. But I was becoming someone who lied constantly, who invaded privacy, who operated in shadows and justified it because I was right. I was becoming someone who moved through the world with careful deception. The difference, I told myself, was that I was doing this to stop her from hurting people. She was doing it for profit. But even thinking that, I wasn't entirely sure it was true anymore. Part of me wanted to hurt her now. Part of me wanted her to feel the humiliation and violation that I felt. I had 6 days until my parents came home. I had documented her crimes, her pattern, her co-conspirator. I had evidence that would genuinely matter, audio recordings, photographs of her ledger, timestamps, transaction histories. I had enough to destroy her life. The question wasn't anymore whether I could do it. The question was whether I should do it the way I was planning, or if I should do something else entirely. Something that gave my parents a chance to make the choice themselves, rather than presenting them with a daughter who'd already taken matters into her own hands and burned down the family in the process. Because that's what this would do. It would burn everything down. And I was going to have to decide if that was justice or just revenge wearing a better costume. #chunk 5. I made the decision on day 6. Not with certainty, I don't think I was capable of certainty anymore, but with the grim clarity that comes from knowing you're about to blow up your own life whether you're ready or not. The decision was this: I would tell my parents first. Not the authorities. Not the family group chat. Not the internet. My parents. It felt like the most dangerous option and the only honest one. If I went to the cops or the platforms without giving them a chance to process what their mother had done, I'd be making the choice for them. I'd be deciding how they responded to a betrayal I hadn't caused. And maybe that made me weak or naive, but I was 17 and I'd already lied to someone I loved every single day for a week straight. I didn't want to add, made major legal decisions for the family, to that list. But there was a problem. My parents weren't coming back for 2 more days, and my grandmother was still in the house, still calling Marcus, still operating like she owned our lives. I'd thought about this while lying awake for the past 36 hours. I couldn't just wait until they landed and then drop this bomb at the airport. I needed to create distance between her and me before they arrived, because if she suspected anything, if she saw it in my face, heard it in my voice, she would act. And I had no idea what acting meant for someone like her. Destroying evidence was the optimistic scenario. So I texted Olivia at 2 a.m. on day 6. Can I stay at your place for a couple nights? Family stuff is weird. She'd responded within 20 minutes because she's that kind of friend. Always. What's wrong? I'd written and deleted responses 50 times before finally sending, I'll explain when I see you. The lie I told my grandmother was simple. I said that Olivia's mom had invited me to help with a last-minute art project for a local fundraiser. She needed extra hands, and it would keep me busy while my parents were gone. My grandmother had actually seemed relieved, less supervision required, more unsupervised time for her to operate. She'd even offered me cash for lunch, which I'd taken because refusing it would have seemed suspicious. The horrible part was that she hugged me goodbye. You're such a good girl, she'd said, her hand patting my back. Helping your friend's family like that. That's the kind of thing that matters in life, you know. Being useful. Being needed. I'd frozen in her embrace, her words burrowing into my skull like parasites. Being useful. Being needed. That's what she'd said about my belongings too, that I didn't need them, that they were being wasted. Her justification for taking them was wrapped up in this philosophy that things belong to whoever could use them best, extract value from them most efficiently. I wondered if she'd ever thought about her own utility to the family. If she'd already calculated what we were worth and found us wanting. Yeah, I'd managed. That matters. Now I was at Olivia's house, sitting on her bedroom floor while she painted her nails and gave me the space to talk at my own pace. She was good like that, she didn't push. She just waited, and I appreciated it more than I could articulate. My grandmother is committing fraud, I said finally. Olivia's brush stopped mid-stroke. She looked at me with genuine concern. Like, financial fraud? Or, like, systematically robbing families by posing as an estate liquidator while secretly selling their belongings for way more than she paid them. And she stole stuff from my house while she was supposed to be house-sitting. And I have evidence. A lot of evidence. I brought my laptop with me. I'd organized everything into folders, screenshots, audio files, photographs of the ledger, transaction histories, email chains. I'd created a master document that laid out the timeline of her thefts from our house alongside the dates she'd listed items on eBay. I'd cross-referenced the names in her ledger with the buyers and sellers databases I could access. I was prepared. I was thorough. I was also terrified. Oh my God, Olivia said, and set down her nail polish. Have you told your parents? Not yet. They land tomorrow night. I couldn't. I can't tell them while she's still in the house. She'd know something was wrong, and I think she might run. Or destroy evidence. Or I don't know what. Okay, so what are you going to do? That was the thing. That was exactly what I didn't know. I have to give them a choice, I said slowly, working through it out loud because Olivia's bedroom felt safer than the inside of my own head. I can't just make all the decisions and present them with a done deal. I think that's just another way of taking control away from people. Different motivation, same outcome. But you're going to show them the evidence, Olivia said. It wasn't a question. Yeah. I'm going to show them everything and let them decide if they want to press charges, contact the platforms, report her to the authorities, whatever. It's their mother and their decision. Olivia was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. What if they don't want to destroy her? What if your mom especially is like, this is my mother, I don't want to press charges, I just want to talk to her. I'd thought about this. I'd thought about it constantly. Then I guess I have to live with that. Even though she'll keep doing this to other families. Even then, I said, and the words tasted like ash. Because I can't make my parents hurt their mother just because I think it's the right choice. I can present the evidence. I can tell them I think it's the right choice. But I can't make it for them. That seems like a cop-out, Olivia said, not unkindly. It probably is, I admitted. But the alternative is me becoming the person who decides what happens to people in this family, and I don't think I'm equipped for that. I'm 17. I'm angry. I'm not objective. What I didn't say was that I was also scared. Scared of what would happen if I destroyed my grandmother. Scared of what it would do to my mother. Scared of the permanent rupture in our family that I'd started and couldn't take back. I was scared that in trying to stop her from hurting people, I was becoming someone who hurt people too. When do you tell them? Olivia asked. Tomorrow night, I said. Right after they get home, before she has a chance to spin whatever narrative she's prepared. 24 hours. I had 24 hours to prepare for the moment I told my parents that their mother was a criminal, and they would have to decide what that meant for all of us. I didn't sleep that night either. #chunk6. The airport pickup was scheduled for 7:15 p.m. I'd checked the flight status obsessively since 4 a.m., on time, on time, on time. Each refresh felt like a countdown to a detonation I couldn't defuse. I'd spent most of the day at Olivia's, which meant I'd spent most of the day trying not to think about what I was about to do. We'd watched 3 movies I couldn't remember. She'd ordered Thai food I barely touched. We'd sat in companionable silence for hours, and I'd been grateful for her presence in a way that felt too big to explain. But at 6:30 p.m., I had to go home. My mom had texted from the airport, landing soon. Can't wait to see you guys. How was everything? Everything. As if the past 2 weeks had been normal. As if my grandmother hadn't spent that entire time methodically dismantling our trust. I texted back, good. See you soon. I was waiting on the front porch when they pulled into the driveway. My dad got out first, stretching his back like he always did after long flights. My mom followed, and for a moment, just a moment, I let myself pretend this was a normal homecoming. They looked happy. Relaxed. Like people who just had a nice vacation and were ready to get back to normal life. I was about to destroy that. My grandmother appeared in the doorway behind me, and that's when my carefully constructed plans started to crack. There they are, she called out, moving past me to the porch railing. How was the trip? You both look wonderful. Come in, come in. I've prepared a welcome home dinner. Nothing fancy, but... That's so sweet, Mom, my mom said, hugging her. But we're actually pretty tired. Long flight. We might just order something in and get to bed early. My grandmother's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I caught it because I'd been studying her expressions for 2 weeks straight, cataloging every micro-expression, every tell. She didn't like that plan. She wanted them fed and happy and settled before anything complicated could happen. Too bad. Actually, I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, too steady, like I was speaking through a filter. Can you guys come inside? There's something I need to talk to you about. My mom's face shifted. That particular shift that mothers do when they sense something's wrong with their kids. What's the matter, honey? Are you okay? I'm fine. But it's about Grandma's time here. I need to show you something. The color actually drained from my grandmother's face. I watched it happen in real time, this visible confirmation that she'd known all along that I knew. She hadn't been stupid. She'd been calculating her options. What on earth, my grandmother said, but her voice had changed. The saccharine sweetness was gone, replaced by something sharper. What are you talking about? Inside, I said. All of us. My dad exchanged a look with my mom. That particular look married couples do when one of their kids is acting weird and they're trying to silently communicate about whether to be worried or annoyed. My mom looked worried. My dad looked like he was already tired, and this was just adding to his exhaustion. They came inside. I set my laptop on the living room coffee table. My hands were shaking. I'd rehearsed this 1,000 times, but the reality of it was so much larger than the rehearsal. This was the moment everything changed. Before I show you this, I said, I need you to know that I did something I'm not proud of. I went through Grandma's things. I took photos and screenshots without permission. I accessed some things I probably shouldn't have accessed. I'm not saying that to make excuses for what I found, I'm saying it because you deserve to know that part too. Okay. My mom said carefully. I opened the folder. The master document. And I started to explain. I showed them the ledger. I explained the numbering system, the pattern of entries, the coded descriptions. I showed them the screenshots of the eBay listings, the dates they were posted, the prices she charged. I laid out the timeline of when items disappeared from our house and when they appeared online. This is ridiculous, my grandmother said. Her voice had taken on a hard edge I'd never heard before. That's my personal property. You have no right. These are my belongings, I said quietly. My gaming setup. My collectibles. The watch Grandpa Joe gave me before he died. The room went silent. My mom reached out and took the laptop, scrolling through the evidence with an expression I couldn't read. My dad stood behind her, reading over her shoulder. Neither of them said anything for what felt like an eternity. I found other things too, I continued, because if I stopped now, I'd lose my nerve entirely. I found a ledger in her room with dozens of names and transaction amounts. I cross-referenced some of them with eBay seller accounts. I think she's been running this as a business. Contacting estate sales, buying items, then immediately reselling them and lying about the profit margins to the families. But it's not always estates. Some of these are recent. Some of these are current. My grandmother stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. I was trying to help you people, and this is the thanks I get. Accusations in. Where are you going? My dad asked. His voice was very quiet. To pack my things. Clearly I'm not welcome here. Actually, my mom said, and she looked up from the laptop with an expression I'd never seen before on her face, you're going to sit back down and explain some of this. My grandmother paused. For a moment, I thought she might actually run. I could see her calculating the odds, weighing her options. But she sat. Slowly. Like someone being forced to comply at gunpoint. My mom kept scrolling. I watched her face as she found the photos I'd taken of my personal items, lined up in someone else's house before being sold. I watched her expression when she saw the price tags. How much money are we talking about here? She asked, and her voice had gone very cold. Just from our house. Probably about $4,000 in merchandise she sold in the past 2 weeks. But based on the ledger, if even half of these transactions are real, she's moved somewhere around $150,000 in goods in the past year. My dad sat down heavily on the couch. I wasn't going to go to the police, I said quickly. I wasn't going to do anything without talking to you first. I needed you to know. I needed you to have the evidence so you could decide what to do. My grandmother opened her mouth. Don't, my mom said. And she didn't. #chunk7. The silence stretched out like taffy being pulled. My mom set the laptop down slowly, deliberately, as if she were handling something that might explode. My dad's hands were clasped so tightly together that his knuckles had gone white. My grandmother sat rigid in the wingback chair, her jaw working like she was chewing something bitter. I need to call your mother, my dad said finally, his voice thick. He meant his sister, my Aunt Rachel. She needs to know about this. Wait, my grandmother said. Her voice had shifted again, become something almost pleading. Let's not be hasty. There are explanations for everything. You're taking a very young person's interpretation of. Stop, my mom said. She wasn't loud about it. She was so quiet that my grandmother actually did stop talking. Just, stop trying to explain right now. I can't listen to you try to rationalize this. My dad stood up and walked into the kitchen. I could hear him opening the fridge, closing it, opening a cupboard. Not looking for anything. Just moving because sitting still was impossible. I understood that impulse. Those items were cluttering your space, my grandmother said, and I could hear the desperation creeping in now. You're 17 years old. You don't need all of that. I was helping you. I was teaching you about materialism and my grandfather's watch, my mom said quietly. The one his father gave him. The one Joe was supposed to pass on to his own children someday. You sold that watch for $180. It was just a watch. It was not just a watch. My mom's voice cracked on the last word. She turned away, and I realized she was crying. Not dramatically. Just silent tears running down her face while she stared at the wall. I felt something twist in my chest. I'd known this would hurt. I'd prepared myself for my parents to be angry at my grandmother. But seeing my mom actually cry, seeing the way her shoulders shook slightly as she pressed her hand to her mouth, made something in me crack too. I'm sorry, my grandmother said. I'm sorry, I didn't think. That's the problem, my dad said, coming back into the room. He was holding nothing, hands still empty. You didn't think about anyone but yourself. He pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. I could hear him dialing. His sister answered on the third ring, I could hear her tinny voice through the phone. My dad's conversation was brief and brutal. Rachel, it's David. I need you to sit down. No, everyone's fine, physically. But I need to tell you about Mom. Yes, your mother. No, listen. We need to talk about some illegal activity she's been running. The word illegal hung in the air like something poisonous. My grandmother's face went a shade paler. Through the phone, I could hear my aunt's voice rising in volume and pitch. My dad was patient, walking her through it in the same methodical way I'd walked through it with my parents. The same way you explain something terrible, calmly, clearly, because the content is bad enough without the delivery making it worse. When my dad finished, there was a long pause. Then my aunt said something that made him close his eyes and nod even though she couldn't see him. Yeah, he said. I know. I'm going to have to. Yeah, we're going to call the police. I think we have to. The words landed like a physical blow. My grandmother made a sound, half gasp, half sob. No. No, David, you can't, that's family. We handle this within family. You can't bring the police into. You brought the police into this the moment you committed fraud, my dad said. His voice was completely steady now. Eerily so. You brought them in the moment you started running what amounts to a financial scam operation out of our home while pretending to care for our child. I do care about you, my grandmother said, looking at me. Her eyes were desperate, searching. You know I do. This was just. I made some mistakes. I needed the money. Your grandfather's medical bills were higher than I told everyone. I'm on a fixed income and I was scared, Anne. So you stole from us, I said. My voice sounded small in the room. You stole from your own family. From me specifically. You took things you knew were important to me and you sold them. I didn't think you'd miss them. I missed them, I said, and I could feel my voice getting stronger. I missed my gaming setup. I missed my collectibles. I missed knowing that my grandfather's watch was still in our family. I missed being able to trust you. My grandmother's face crumpled. She looked suddenly much older than she had 2 weeks ago, like something fundamental had shifted in her skeleton. Like the effort of maintaining the lie had been the only thing holding her together. My mom had composed herself. She was sitting very still, very straight, but her eyes were still red. We're going to need to speak with a lawyer, she said to my dad. Before we go to the police. There are complications. I knew what she meant. There were always complications with family. There was history, and obligation, and the weight of years of relationships all tangled up together. There was the fact that this was his mother. There was the fact that my grandmother was in her 70s and a criminal record could devastate what was left of her life. There was also the fact that she betrayed us so thoroughly that there wasn't really a choice anymore. I can call someone tomorrow, my dad said. First thing. I'll call my parents, my mom added. They need to know what's happening. My grandmother stood up abruptly. I'm going to my room. No, my dad said. You're going to sit in that chair and you're going to wait while we figure out what to do next. You're not going anywhere. It was the tone of someone dealing with a criminal, not a relative. The shift was complete. In the span of 30 minutes, my grandmother had transformed from family to suspect. She sat back down very slowly, and she didn't look at any of us again. #Chunk8. The police arrived on a Tuesday morning. 2 officers, one older with graying temples and one younger with kind eyes, stood in our living room with notebooks already in hand. My parents had called a lawyer first, as promised, and she'd advised us on how to proceed. The evidence was meticulous enough that there wasn't much gray area. The platforms my grandmother had used kept records. The bank transfers were documented. The ledger was damning. My grandmother sat in the wingback chair again. She'd barely left it in 4 days. She'd slept in that chair, eaten in that chair, stared at nothing in that chair. When the officers explained that they were opening an investigation and that she'd be formally questioned, she just nodded. All the fight had drained out of her. I'd been prepared to feel vindicated. I'd expected to feel relief, or even triumph. What I actually felt was hollow. The investigation took 3 weeks. The police uncovered everything, not just the items from our house, but a pattern spanning years. At least 15 other families in the community had sold items through the same platforms using similar patterns. Elderly people with fixed incomes, financial pressures, grandchildren with too much stuff. The amounts were always small enough that many families never noticed, or chalked it up to lost items. But added together, it painted a picture of systematic theft and fraud. My grandmother was charged with 17 counts of theft, 5 counts of fraud, and 1 count of receiving stolen property. The receiving stolen property charge was because some of the items she'd sold had themselves been stolen from other sources, a detail that came out during the investigation and made everything significantly worse. The family erupted. My Aunt Rachel didn't speak to my dad for 2 weeks. Not because she was defending my grandmother, but because she felt blindsided and hurt. She'd been sending my grandmother money to help with medical bills, money that apparently hadn't all gone where she thought it was going. My grandmother's side of the family scattered like birds from a breaking branch. Some took her side. Some took ours. Most just withdrew entirely, unwilling to pick a side in what had become openly ugly. I had to give a statement to the police. Had to sit across from a detective and explain how I'd discovered everything, how I'd documented it, why I'd done it. The detective was kind, but the questions still felt like accusations sometimes. You were upset about these items? Yes. Angry? Yes. Did you consider that your grandmother might have had financial difficulties? I had, actually. But it didn't change anything. The court date was in late November. My grandmother pleaded no contest to the theft charges but contested the fraud charges. Her lawyer, a public defender who looked deeply exhausted, argued that my grandmother hadn't intended to defraud anyone, that she'd simply needed money for medical expenses and had made poor decisions in crisis. The prosecutor had a spreadsheet showing 3 years of sales, each one methodically logged, each one clearly premeditated. Intent was written all over that ledger in my grandmother's own handwriting. She was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility, with restitution to be determined. The restitution part was complicated because so many items were irreplaceable. How do you put a dollar value on your grandfather's watch? On collectibles that were no longer in production? On the emotional damage of having a family member systematically steal from you? The courts did their best. They calculated replacement costs, they interviewed families, they built a number. It was large enough to bankrupt my grandmother's remaining assets. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was tired. The house felt different after that. The empty spaces where my things had been were eventually filled with new furniture, new items, but they weren't the same. Some losses just can't be replaced. My parents were cautious in ways they hadn't been before. There was a safe installed in my dad's office. Valuable items were photographed and documented. Trust, once broken, leaves scars even after it's technically repaired. My grandmother wrote me a letter from the facility. I didn't read it. My mom asked if I wanted to, and I said no. She respected that. My dad never mentioned it. I think he threw it away, or maybe my mom did. I never found it in the trash, so maybe they kept it somewhere I wouldn't find it. I didn't ask. 6 months into her sentence, my grandmother had a mild stroke. She recovered, but it left her with slight weakness on one side. My mom cried when she got the call from the prison. I saw her on the phone with my Aunt Rachel, and they were both crying. The prison allowed a brief visit, and my mom went alone. She didn't tell me much about it afterward, just that my grandmother had apologized again, and this time it seemed genuine, and that my grandmother looked very small in the prison uniform. I didn't go. I couldn't quite bring myself to do it. What I did do was graduate. I got into a good college. I studied computer science and cybersecurity, actually, partly because I discovered I was good with research and documentation, and partly because I wanted to understand systems better, how they could be manipulated and how they could be protected. My parents were proud. My therapist, yes, I ended up getting a therapist, the whole situation had shaken something loose in me that needed professional attention, said that turning my trauma into purpose was healthy. My grandmother was released after 14 months for good behavior. She moved in with my Aunt Rachel in a different city, far enough away that I didn't have to worry about running into her at the grocery store. The family stayed fractured, split into people who'd forgiven her and people who hadn't. I wasn't in either camp exactly. I existed in a third space, not forgiving, not unforgiving, just moved on. Sometimes I think about that moment when my parents were looking at the evidence, when my mom cried about my grandfather's watch. I think about how my need for justice had created so much collateral damage. My grandmother's life was essentially over, her reputation destroyed, her freedom stripped, her health failing. My aunt's relationship with my dad had never quite recovered. My family's sense of safety had been fractured. And I'd done it. Not because I was wrong, I wasn't, but because sometimes the right choice and a devastating choice are the same thing. The watch was never recovered. But I was okay with that eventually.